Well, I'm excited to be joined by the guys from Blurry Creatures, the Nate Henry, and Luke Rogers. Guys, thank you for joining me on the Megalithic Marvels podcast.
Let's go. We're here.
Good to be here. Derek, we so appreciate you, man. This is it's fun to be on your show. You've been on our show a ton. And I just love what you do. And your work is amazing, and you're a better person. It's cool. I'm a big fan. I was a big fan before we got to know you, and a bigger fan now. But great to be on the show. Great to see you.
Yeah.
It is great to have you guys, and it's kind of really exciting to have the script flipped here. Often when I'm seeing your incredible, handsome faces online like this, I'm being interviewed, but now I get to interview you, and I'm excited about some of these topics we're going to get into. I want to ask you guys, I don't normally talk about Bigfoot, but being that you were originally a Bigfoot podcast, I got to ask you about this coming out of the gate here in a second. I want to talk giants, Nephilim, some of these footprints you guys have been showing on your channels. We got to get into portals, stargates. Of course, we got to talk about the latest UFO phenomena and how that pertains to aliens. And of course, ancient tech. I want to hear about your trip to Peru. This is going to be an incredible episode. Hope you guys are ready for this.
We are.
Never talked about any of this before, so this is going to be a first time for us.
Yeah.
So I want to start out by saying congrats on not just your incredible podcast, but the incredible community you guys have created here in just really a handful of years. So I think you posted recently somewhere, I saw that you guys hit top 5 in some category worldwide. Was that the science category?
Yeah. We hit, I think last week we hit like 240 in the US, 244 or something on there. Top 250 for like a couple of days, which is, crazy to even think about, that you talk about some of these subjects that are so outside of the realm of, pop culture. And here you are cracking into the, just to get into the top 1,000 podcasts with all the millions out there. We're blown away. We're humbled. I think we try to work on making the content accessible to people and have fun. Come on, see some memes, hang out, laugh a little bit, but also like get something to take with you to kind of rattle your brain a little bit while you're going about your day. So I think that's a good, for whatever reason, sort of a good mix of all those things. And dude, we're just blown away that people listen, care, and share it to their friends. So just humbled.
Yeah, congrats, you guys. I mean, following you the last couple of years, I know how much hard work this is. So again, it's really cool to see when the rewards start coming in. So I just kind of wanted to hear from you guys. For people that might not know, give us just some quick bullet points kind of the why and how you two came together to launch the Blurry Creatures podcast. Give us a little bit of the backstory.
So Blurry Creatures was I was fascinated by paranormal topics for a while, and was listening to a lot of podcasts over the years, kind of the early podcasts. And then I started getting into David Paulides' stuff, Missing 411, watching Bigfoot documentaries, trying to figure out, okay, there's this sort of scientific phenomenon going on in the woods and state parks, and people are going missing. Where are they going? First, I thought it was Bigfoot. Then I was kind of like, well, it seems more complicated. And then about 2019, designed a logo called and got the domain Blurry Creatures. And Luke and I had done some work on some previous podcasts, had a bunch of mutual friends. We knew of each other. We hung out a couple times, and I knew he knew how to podcast. And the one thing I was thinking in the back of my mind is, I don't want to take this journey by myself. I was listening to a lot of guys like Mike Heiser and people talking about the Nephilim, and I grew up in the church, and I was just fascinated with this whole explanation for all the cataclysms in the Old Testament and all the weird stuff that happened. And I hit up Luke, and I was like, dude, I got everything ready to go. Do you want to join me in the Blurryverse? And I sent you a message. I think I slipped into Luke's DMs. I was like, dude, come on.
Well, it started in the public space first, Nate. Our interaction. I think it had to do with like a tweet about Bigfoot, which is funny because I know that one of the if you listen to our show at all, and if you haven't, one of the first things we talk about was ask people for their thoughts on Bigfoot, right? It's it's a weird enigma, right? It's a cultural phenomena, and people have a lot of thoughts because you could buy Bigfoot, almost anything branded by Bigfoot, and there are attractions and museums, and there are syndicated shows about trying to find this guy. And for me, like, you know, Nate had the nexus of this idea. And like you said, I had been podcasting, and he had been podcasting previously as well. And the podcast that I was on with my brother, we retired it due to some contractual things with his employer, and I was looking for a new creative project. And it always been, like Nate said, in the same way, I'd always been fascinated by history. Is why I was a big fan of what previous to this, big fan of what you were doing. Is I love history, and I love to think about and learn about the things that you know of antiquity. And you know, a lot of that doesn't make sense. This is your platform, like, you know, then the mainstream narrative isn't really that good. It doesn't really explain a lot. It can't really explain a lot. And so, you know, when Nate approached me about, hey, you want to do a Bigfoot podcast, it was an absolute yes. It was 2020, and you know, going back to kind of how our show has grown, I think that there are a lot of folks, considering, you know, in the last 3 years, considering everything everyone's been through in the West and across the world, especially, people are looking for a lot of answers. And if you're a Christian, you want to looking for answers that you can contextualize within the scriptures and within your faith. And you know, we began with Bigfoot. Like, what is this thing? What is this enigma? We call the gateway drug. It's sort of into the weird. And Nate does a great job of describing sort of the thesis of our show, which really is that, you know, the church really doesn't do a great job, generally speaking, addressing the paranormal. And the paranormal community itself really doesn't address a lot of the paranormal through a biblical context or biblical lens, right? So we want to marry those things. Like when you say paranormal is also a weird. It has a lot of weird connotations semantically, right? But really, we're just talking about things that sort of live on the fringes, right? Bigfoot and ghosts and all the weird things in the Bible. You know, as you pointed out, the Nephilim, and what does that mean? And then, you know, there's the conquest of Joshua and these things that we're trying to make sense of here in the 21st century. But maybe all these things we can pull a thread, right? Maybe there's a thread through all of this, especially if you're a Christian, and we believe there is. And so trying to pull that thread and make sense of everything weird, as Nate said, with everything in the Blurryverse, right? Even in your space, the megalithic stuff. How do we explain that? You know, other than that there was, and I love what you do, the ancient technology. How did that work? How does that work? Is there can we predicate that? Is there evidence for that in the scripture? And we believe there is. And so that's really where we come from. And it's a big mishmash grab bag of things, but I feel like Nate and I, it's a journey podcast, and we've been on this journey trying to find better answers for questions that don't really have an answer. And trying to do that within the context of our faith. And for us, that's talking to theologians, experts like yourself when it comes to megaliths, and then folks that have written books, and what we say, put in the 10,000 hours, right? So there's quite a bit of experiential stuff that we produce on our show, but there's about double that in what we consider expert interviews. So folks that have taken the time, spent the 10,000 hours to become an expert, and written the books, done the research, been on the ground, and have their story to share. And that's a long answer, but you know, Nate and I have been at it now this is year 3, Nate, and it's just been an amazing journey for us. I think you can't help but be changed and have your faith stretched and grow when you're diving into a lot of the weird stuff. And Nate mentioned Mike Heiser. He really is he's a hero for us in this space, and we lost Mike this year. But you know, he wrote what I believe is just a paradigm shifting book called The Unseen Realm. And Mike will tell you he didn't have any original ideas. He just compiled and stood on the shoulders of others, but he just compiled it. He organized it. And what it really is about putting the supernatural back into to the scriptures and to our faith. And I think that is that what's the word I'm looking for? That paradigm or that that thesis is really in a lot of ways where our show lands as well. And we got a chance to interview Mike a few times, become good friends with him and Trenna. And I think that we serve an infinite God, and I think oftentimes we put him in our faith in a box that feels comfortable. But a lot of the things that we experience, a lot of things being talked about in mainstream media, a lot of the stones we can touch, like when we were just in Peru and you were in Egypt, a lot of stones you can touch, their stories there that you can find the context for within the scripture. And I'll stop there. I've talked way too much, but that's how this show came about.
Incredible journey. That's crazy. Only 3 years you've been at this now. It probably feels a lot longer. Maybe it doesn't. But like you said, you kind of started out as this Bigfoot podcast, and you often, for people who follow the Blurry Creatures on social media, they're crushing it on Instagram. They're all over YouTube, Twitter, all the places, or X. But you've always, you're usually featuring Bigfoot in your branding. You started out as a Bigfoot podcast. Like Nate's always saying, it's the gateway drug is Bigfoot. On your show, you've asked me and others, what is your take on Bigfoot? So I want to turn it to you guys. You've had 3+ years to marinate on this. You've heard countless answers about Bigfoot. I want to hear, what do you guys personally believe? And again, I don't normally talk about Bigfoot, but I do live in the Pacific Northwest, and I have heard a lot of stories, including those from my grandpa back when he was hunting in the good old days. And they came upon this place in their camp where there was these massive footprints, and they were so taken back, they actually called authorities from the University of Washington, who came out and plastered these. And so I grew up seeing these photographs of these plastered footprints and hearing the tales of Bigfoot. So I want to know from you guys, what is your personal take on what Bigfoot is? Who wants to start?
I guess I'll go. Break it up a little here. I think there's like the animal meter. If you were going to 0 to 100, how animal-like something is. If it's, there's certain animals out there that have sort of human qualities. There's, people raise certain types of animals and they're smart and they can do things. And then there's just animals that are just dumb and walk and just do their thing, and they're just very basic kind of, basically just put it in the freezer, right? Kind of animal. But you hear like dolphins and they're really smart, intelligent, things like that. I think Bigfoot definitely blows past the meter of what an animal can do and where it is on that. It's just you do a show like this for a while, you just can't help but realize that it's not in that. It's not in the 0 to 100. It's off the charts of kind of the weird stuff associated. Like, we just interviewed a guy who talked about how he was in his cabin sleeping one night, and Bigfoot creature put this vision into his mind, and he could see from the viewpoint of an actual Bigfoot. And he basically, this creature took over his senses. Before doing this podcast, I heard stories like this. Like, people walk into, they get mind speak, they get something's communicating with them that's not using our traditional faculties of how you and I would communicate, right? Like, if I could just beam my thoughts to you right now, you'd be like, what are we dealing with? And that's some of the stuff that comes along with Bigfoot. And there's all this association with UFOs and things. But that's hard for a lot of people. It's hard for a lot of people to accept that there is an unknown species out there, let alone a giant, humanoid bipedal species. Because usually we find little rodents or bugs or things that are new. So you have to kind of, I don't know, you have to open your mind to it for a while, and then you have to kind of see the evidence and gather. Like you said, there's footprints. People have had all these stories. And I honestly, Derek, I'm surprised at how many people have had a Bigfoot experience. It's not, people will come on our show to talk about things not related to Bigfoot, but they have a Bigfoot experience. And you're like, what the heck? How are so many people encountering this creature, this animal, And then, there's different levels of sightings. There's like the A sightings, the B sightings, and there's, they go all the way down, and people have not a lot of people have like a good high quality like A sighting where they're like standing face to face with this creature, but some people do. And the weird, bizarre stuff that happens in and around that is undeniable. And I feel that Bigfoot has sort of a multiple types of DNAs going on. It's sort of primate on one hand, and on the other hand, it might have some of this Nephilim DNA in it, where it can do things that defy our abilities and skills. Bigfoot seems to be able to walk from our world to somewhere else. He seems to be able to disappear. There's so many weird stories where it's you see it and then you don't see it. You shoot it, nothing happens. What is that? How is it able to do that? You follow tracks and they're gone. It's sort of this mystery. And I think if it was just an animal, we would have pulled it out of the woods already, because it would have been dumb enough to get killed. But it seems to avoid game cams. It seems to have sort of a knowledge and a feeling of what's around it. So I don't think you see Bigfoot. I think Bigfoot, most of the time Bigfoot finds you. And every once in a while, I think maybe you do get a dumb one. Maybe there are less intelligent ones, right? And they happen to be like, "Oh crap! I don't have my smoke screen on. I gotta like whoop, and I'm gone." Right? Like I think sometimes they forget what they're doing, but they're curious. They look in people's windows. They're out there. They kind of study us. So I think it's. I don't know. It's in a classification of its own, and we can only speculate what that is and where it comes from. But that's sort of the best answer I can come up with right now, is that it's off the charts in terms of just an animal.
No, I think if you're not in the space, right? If you're kind of new to the Bigfoot world, maybe you've watched Finding Bigfoot, right? Which is really that it's the big platform. Everybody's kind of maybe seen an episode or two. They don't. Spoiler alert: they don't find Bigfoot. There's something very, like Nate would say. Nate did say there's something very strange about this animal, in the sense that there's very much a physical aspect to it, right? It leaves footprints. Jeff Meldrum, who we brought on the show, Dr. Jeff Meldrum, is probably the world-renowned or foremost expert on this creature. Has got thousands of casted footprints. He has a casted butt print, and we made some jokes on the show about that. That was fun. But this thing is physical enough to leave evidence, right? But then in the Bigfoot world, there's two camps. There's this whole, like Nate said, there's this whole, it's 100% animal. It's like a remnant of Gigantopithecus, right? It's this very elusive ape, North American ape, although it's seen across the planet in some version or another, so it just can't be a North American ape. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. But the other camp is what they like to call woo, which has all this sort of connotation that goes with it, right? But what that is saying is there are all these really weird things that happen around Bigfoot. As Nate said, there's orb lights and UFO activity. We talked to a Navajo ranger who was a 30-year ranger on the res, and he has stories about tracking Bigfoot and the footprints disappearing. And I mean, not into a river or just disappearing, stopping. They're gone, and they're tracking it along, a dry creek bed. They just disappear, right? And you've got stories about people, raising weapons and it disappears, like dematerializes. Not that they looked away and then looked back and it's gone, but there's something very odd and strange and really, and I don't love the term supernatural, but something along the lines of that are associated. We talked to Ron Moorhead, and he has all this really crazy samurai chatter, and all of his experiences included all these light orbs. I don't know if there's any other animals that have that sort of phenomenon with it, right? You've got glow in the dark algae and stuff like that, but not like what's being described. I think there's just too many odd experiences with this for it to be just an elusive animal. And as Nate said, we do discover new species all the time, but like they're always really small for the most part. They're little rodents or bugs or tiny birds, right? That these things would elude because of their size and their remoteness. Not in the same way, Bigfoot is so large. The footprints there's something very strange. And we talked about Mike Heiser Mike famously in our show, we quote that he said that, if just one of these experiences it's true, then it changes the whole paradigm. And I think there are enough of these to say not everybody who's telling the story is, on some kind of weird psychedelic trip or making it up or looking for attention. These did happen, and it wasn't in their heads. So there's too much weird things around Bigfoot for it to be just a flesh and blood creature, especially because people can find all the evidence, but no one's yet to bring a body out of the woods. That's a really strange situation.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how that's a juxtaposition that's tough, right? You find all the footprints and you can see all the evidence, but no one can pull a body out. That's weird.
And the weird, one of the other parts of the Bigfoot story is it seems to be, there are interactions where it's not terrifying.
Yeah, it's weird. That is. Yeah.
So it seems to sometimes be a neutral character in sort of the paranormal space, which most of the time, if you look into these things, most of the other things that people see are kind of terrifying and seem evil in nature. Bigfoot's like almost, some people even go as far as to say sort of the protector of the woods, which
there's benevolent experiences like saving kids from drowning, or like these kids, like the politest paradigm, right, where these kids disappear and they're like, well, I spent the night with a bear and took care of me, and you're like, that doesn't really make any sense. There's a spectrum though, right, Nate? Like, I mean, you do have all these really terrifying experiences with Sasquatch, but there's also this whole benevolent Bigfoot paradigm as well. So
it has a personality. That's the weird part.
It's weird. I guess the answer is
angry one day, and then he's your friend the next. Who knows?
Sounds like your crazy uncle, right? I mean, it's like no, I think that's right. I don't know. I think as the show barrels on, Nate,
it's like a human. There's good and bad. There's a wide gamut of different types of human personalities. Sometimes humans will save a stranger, right? Someone's choking in a restaurant. Someone will save their life. Someone, you have this Good Samaritan stories all the time of people helping people, and then you have Good Samaritan stories with Bigfoot, which is really strange. It's so strange. So people want to classify it. People want to put it in a category, and it seems like the stories blow the boxes wide open more and more that you get into the space, and which leads into all the other creatures we talk about on the show. So Bigfoot is just the beginning, and then we started realizing there's this whole alternate history. There's other weird blurry creatures out there, and Luke and I couldn't stay in the Bigfoot space for too long, but we come back and dip our toes in every once in a while with a good story.
Water's always warm, Nate. It's always warm.
Who knows? Sometimes it's nice to just go back to a sort of a casual Bigfoot experience and not some of this crazier stuff that we get into on our show. So,
I would say I think there's we talk about interdimensionality. We're talking about portals at some point, but like the idea of interdimensionality, that's kind of where I'm landing lately. I think there's too many stories of these things, of footprints disappearing, and it just being there's some very famous Yeti footprints that if you can Google on a mountain range in the Himalayas that just go nowhere. They just stop in the snow. That kind of stuff is tough. Like, and people push back and have a hard time with the idea of, mathematically we can prove there are dimensions, but the idea that things can phase in and out. I mean, perhaps that's what's happening here. I think that isn't as crazy as it sounds based upon the body of evidence. At least for me.
Well, let's get into some of these other creatures that you referenced, because you guys started with Bigfoot, like you said, and then you started to branch out into all these other topics. So let's talk about one of our favorite subjects, which is giants, Nephilim, cryptids. You guys have been posting some crazy photographs and videos recently on Instagram and stuff of these giant footprints in Texas, and I think even Montana, that people have been sending to you. You did an episode on it just recently as well. Give us a little breakdown of these giant, what you're calling our humanoid footprints, some of the details about them, and then let's get into this topic.
So here's a book called The Valley of the Giants. This is a book from the 70s, and someone posted some pictures out of this book. Basically, these guys found in the Texas sort of bedrock on this creek, in the Glen Rose area, you had all these dinosaur footprints and these giant man tracks that were sort of fossilized in the ground. And as well as I do, that there's these footprints that have been left in stone all over the world. And we've been told this narrative that this stuff takes millions of years to fossilize and all this other thing. But you realize that it's not true. They find fossilized tools they find fossilized toys, they find fossilized everything now. We kind of realize that it doesn't take very long. So anyway, all that to say is, sometimes you find some good tracks and you're like, whoa, this is actually proves that something stepped here. And Travis Roy from Giants of Ancient America lives down in that area. And I was like, hey, have you seen this book? And he goes, no. I'm like, well, this Dinosaur State Park down near you used to have giant man tracks in there. So he goes down and he investigates, and he found a bunch of really good footprints. Some of these are 24 inches long. Some big guys. We're talking, 30%, 40% bigger than Shaq's shoe. So it's not a typical human being down there. And sometimes in the book, it documents there's up to 50 tracks that they found right alongside dinosaur tracks. And like Luke and I said on that episode, it creates a lot of problems, because here you have humanoid creatures and dinosaurs existing at the same time. You have giant humans existing, and it blows a hole in all these narratives. So in the 80s, there's this conspiracy where the guy said, hey, there used to be signs in this area that said here's caveman tracks. And Travis went to the local creation museum, and they're like, yeah, well, I went to the ranger station and asked them, say, hey, when in the 70s, they used to have signs out here. But flash forward, they started the state park, and it's late 80s. And he's like, they're gone. And they destroyed these tracks. They kind of chiseled out the toes, and they made sure that those disappeared. But he said, I took all the signs out of the park and put them in the shed over here. So, like, there's this conspiracy to kind of whitewash history and tell us this sort of PG version of what happened. And these things are millions of years old, but you can see all these different types of dinosaurs and humanoid creatures walking together. And so we posted a bunch of those. We all shared it, actually, between the 3 accounts. So if you're interested, you can go to any of our Instagram accounts and see these footprints and even some film of them. And they're still there, Derek. They're massive, and some of them are 6 inches into the ground, hard to fake. But we also get them from time to time. Like you said, someone sent us one from Montana. It was sort of in more of a sort of a harder stone, but that track was twice the size of a normal human foot. You can see it outlined, and just awesome. I tried to buy it off the guy, had him ship it to us, but the stonemason said that the customer wouldn't part with it. So, dude, it's fascinating. There's proof that the giants were here in America. And Travis, who has this account basically dedicated just to giants, was luckily just 30 minutes away. How lucky is that? And I think that you just have to have the right conditions to preserve these. Something walked through the muddy river that day, and then it happened to fossilize. But there's a lot of tracks. Normally we only get 1 or 2 tops. There's dozens there, and they're still there. So
they're still there.
I think I've always heard about the dinosaur tracks down there in Texas, and even heard that there was, human footprints side by side, but I had never heard that they were giant footprints. And if I'm not mistaken, in the photos and videos that you've posted with Travis, you can still see, I think, the toe details in one of them. And so that's crazy that you're saying on a lot of these, they went in, the authorities, I'm assuming, and chiseled out the toes to make it look like it was just a dinosaur track.
Yeah, if you see that one there, that's a 23-inch track, and that was documented in the 70s.
And this book, there's 4 editions of this book, right? It's not really. You have to. Nate's got a hard copy. But there was a 4th edition, and this is before it became Dinosaur Valley State Park. This is before it became a government run space. Now, some of these footprints fall outside the park, which is where you get lucky, right? Some of these aren't within the confines, and as Nate said, all the original signage around these has disappeared. But the tracks are still there. And this is actually the same place where I believe it's the same place where they have the dinosaur track and the human footprint that interact, right? And that's now at a museum. I believe it came from the same.
The Creation Museum has it.
Yeah, but I think it came from the same area. This is previous to being a state park.
Yeah.
but this is not a single track. These are a line of footprints, giant footprints. And in our episode, like Nate said, we talk about how big these are compared to something like Shaq's size 22, right? Which was a huge deal when we were all kids. And Shaquille O'Neal, I was in junior high. I remember I had a Orlando Magic starter jacket that was, this is great evidence, and of course it's being whisked away. I think not unlike some of the things that you come across in Egypt, when you have these narratives that get pushed, and so things that are outside or don't work with the narrative either get disappeared or there's a really bad explanation for what's going on here. And this part would be very hard to have a bad explanation. The best thing they can do is destroy. They've tried to destroy some of the tracks, so they're unrecognizable. But there's really good footprints with measurements from the 70s. Travis has been out there and found the ones that are still out there and existing. And I think luckily, not luckily, there's a drought, but because there's been a drought in Texas, some of these things were preserved because they're underwater. And now with things drying up, a lot of these tracks are being exposed again. And part of that is now you're able to find these giant footprints, which are very inconvenient for a lot of mainstream narratives that would say there were never giant humanoid creatures, that somehow they're the same strata as dinosaurs, which supposedly lived, magnitude of millions of years ago, according to that narrative. And then you have, how are they in the same strata? How does that even? It doesn't work for that. So there's incentive there, right? To if you're a proponent of a certain narrative, to make some of these things disappear. And it appears the state park did some of that. Not our conspiracy hat on, because all this stuff there are signs and stories and photos and all this stuff that has existed at one point, and now it's conveniently not there. In a lot of places it was.
Yeah, so you're saying even back, was it in the 70s or 80s, they had official state park signs or whatever that said caveman prints.
Yes.
Yeah. It's in the book. You can see the signs in the book. And, I think that in the late 70s, some of these theories that they've been pushing in school kind of stepped past the theory and became sort of more of like, this is what we teach. This is the fact. This is human origins, and this is the timeline when all this stuff kind of happened. And I get it. I get people have been steeped deep into that kind of modern psyop of we don't talk about theories. You can't talk about any other ideas of how humans might have rolled onto the scene, and you have to make this stuff disappear. But it's all in this book. I had to find it on eBay. You can't even really find it anywhere, and luckily I found it. But you can go to archive.org and look it up. It's called Valley of the Giants by Dr. Doherty, C.N. Doherty, and you can kind of look at it, see some photos. It's pretty cool. It's kind of like that late 70s feel, and see for yourself that there are little glimpses of some dudes that got blurry back in the 70s and were trying to document it the best they could. They didn't have the tools we have today to kind of get the word out. Now you can post a photo or a podcast about this, and millions of people can tune in and listen to, like, hey, there's this alternate history that these guys documented back in the day. And but like Travis has been it's been happening since the mid 1800s. They were digging up these things and writing about it in newspapers. And like Luke said, if just one of them's true, it blows the hole in all this. And giantism's 1 in a million. So we know that there wasn't just a ton of people that had giantism disease just being buried all over the place. I mean,
and a lot of George Mirassans running around. Yeah.
So between the three of us, I think we talk about the creatures. You talk more about the construction, and Travis talks more about the historical accounts of these things being dug up. So I think it's a good trifecta, and Zelda would be happy.
There you go. Yeah. I want to ask you guys about, in a minute, I want you to kind of give me a quick picture of how you envision kind of this ancient golden age, pre-flood, pre-Genesis 6 world. But before I ask you that, so you have a minute to think about that, I want to ask you about this viral reptilian airplane clip that came out a couple weeks ago now. And I think you posted a video of
You
this
there, Derek?
gal on the plane that's freaking out, talking to the reptilian. You got like 6 million views on that?
Oh my!
Yeah,
Nate,
it's
let's
a
talk
little
about this meme.
ridiculous.
This is my favorite meme that we've done. Well, maybe
Sounds
other
like
than the surfer.
Luke kind of gets the credit for this.
He does. Well, I mean, it was kind of like a hype. Like Luke was like, "Hey, Nate, have you heard it? We were in Peru of all places, driving through megaliths, and we're talking about famous YouTube videos." And he's like, "Have you seen the
Like
snake
the ones
one?"
from like when we were in college, right? So like I was in college in the early 2000s. I graduated in 04 from my undergrad. So baby YouTube, right? And then thereafter, like the videos that went kind of viral. I remember coming home watching like the redubbed over PSAs of the 80s of the G.I. Joe PSAs, which were funny. But we were in the car and I was asking Nate if he'd seen this video of this guy, and he puts this hat on and says he's a snake. He's like, I'm a snake. And
I hadn't seen it.
And so we pulled it up, and we're Peru, and then it kind of just became like the running joke until like my wife was like, you have to stop saying that. It's not funny anymore, but I still thought it was funny. And so did Nate. So essentially then this whole thing, this reptile or this lady, who's now been outed, she has this viral video, right, of her basically saying this guy's not real, he's not real, and there's this whole idea of this he's a reptilian. And so Nate, of course, being just a meme master, we had this idea for the meme to be like instead a meme about the Garden of Eden. And it would be like, the serpent's first attempt to try to get out, try to tempt Eve, and it doesn't work, right? Because it's obviously not a snake. And we thought that was pretty funny. We were kind of working through that, and then this video hit, and Nate sent me the idea and was like, "What if we just had it panned to the back, and then there's the snake guy from the early 2000s saying, 'I'm a snake.'" It worked so well, and people, it's doing well. People hate it because they're like,
yeah,
you guys are like whatever. But I thought it was just. I still think it's funny. I probably watched it. I probably have 10 of those. 6 million views of me just watching it, making my wife watch it again. She's like, I'm done watching it. And you're like, no, you're not. This is really good.
It was you guys hit the zeitgeist of that moment with the woman talking about the reptilian on the plane.
Yeah.
And then that guy with his snake impersonation was just too much. Like, I probably watched it 500 times.
I think that's like what Luke and I try to do is make this stuff accessible. We make fun of ourselves. We make fun of, everyone who's just really, really too serious. The content is serious. Like, we're talking about matters, but there's a way to make it fun and interesting. And every once in a while, it's like, all right, get somebody curious about what you're talking about with a fun meme instead of next episode coming, and having just this overall, like, just unrelatable seriousness to it all. So I think that's what we try to do. But yeah, that meme, it was sort of a magical moment. I can't believe it's over 6 million plays. And
Did Nate tell the story though? Because we haven't ever told this on air about your buddy who works with the actual snake guy. This is amazing, Derek.
So I launched this meme, and my buddy messaged me on my private Instagram account. He goes, "Hey, great meme. I work with the snake guy." And I'm like, "What?" I'm like, "I work at a marketing company. He runs like Wendy's Twitter and a bunch of other things. He's actually pretty famous guy that nobody knows, but he'll still do cameos in the snake hat if you want." So I almost paid for a cameo for a snake hat to send it to Luke. Like, just like, dude, the snake guy has seen the meme.
He saw the meme and he thought it was awesome.
Yeah.
So the actual I'm a snake guy saw Nate's buddy works with the guy, and he saw it and he gave us a stamp of approval. So
yeah, that never happens.
No, you guys got all kinds of connections. I mean, even with the snake guy,
it's kind of like, dude. So I know we're fast forward, but we went to Peru. We're going to talk about this at some point. But in like all 80s of 80s moments, we're flying back from Peru.
Yeah,
and it's the last leg of our flight. We land in Florida. And we take a flight from Miami back to Nashville. We both live in the Nashville area. And on our flight is Vanilla Ice. He's the last guy on the plane, and we're like, what a cap to the end of an 80s themed podcast to be coming back from looking at all the megalithic marvels in Peru and talking about all of the untold history, and then having, Mr. Van Winkle on our flight. It just is so apropos.
Wow, did you get to say hi to him?
No, we were.
Some of the good people
exhausted.
on our flight did, but I just you recognize him because you're like, that I know that guy from somewhere, and you're like, dude, that's Vanilla Ice, man. Let's quick to the point. To the point, no faking, right? Waxing MCs like a pound of bacon.
That is epic. On the way back from Peru, you run into Vanilla Ice on the airplane. That's just too coincidental.
It's two blurry creatures, man. It was fun.
We try.
So we try. So it's just I don't know. Like Nate said, I think we like to laugh and we like to have a good time, and so part of what we do, ancillary to talking about the serious stuff and exposing the darkness, is to like poke fun at things, poke fun at ourselves mostly, and wrap it in an 80s, an 80s blanket, and because we're kids of the 80s, right? And I, for whatever reason, I think it resonates with folks, especially in our age bracket, in sort of our era. There's a lot of nostalgia to that, and then it's just there's a fun element to making very serious things and discussions about very serious things a little more approachable. And so, memes are going to be a funny thing, and we're hundreds of years past this. People, you're reading hieroglyphics right now, Derek, in Egypt, and people will be like, man, these guys, this is a pretty good meme they did back in old 2023. But who knows? Maybe they won't.
I'm gonna grab something from my. I'm a bit of a collector myself when it comes to a vintage 80s and 70s stuff. So I'm gonna grab something and show you here on the screen. But while I'm grabbing that, I want you guys to tell me, when it comes to the 80s, what was your favorite thing from the 80s? Whether it was a song, a show, whether it was a toy that you played with. What was one of your favorite things from the 80s? I'll be right back.
Man, the 80s.
Where do you even start, Nate?
I mean,
film, right?
Nothing
film,
really.
The
film NES,
for me.
dude. I remember the first day my brother got a Nintendo Entertainment System. I still remember sitting in the family room. He busted out that with Mario Brothers. He put it in and hit play, and we just began just like, I was probably maybe 6 years old, watching Mario Brothers on TV for the first time, which just blew my mind. And that was we had like crappy, like I think it was like Coleco. It was like a really
ColecoVision.
Yeah, it was like a worse version of Atari before that. So when the Nintendo hit, it literally was like the station wagon that we were rolling around in forever, and then someone rolled in with like an Escalade, and you were like, "What is this?" That was the Nintendo, man. It was just mind blowing. But that's the moment. That was like my first real big moment in the 80s. That and watching Back to the Future.
I was going to say it's film, right? The Back to the Future, Indiana Jones, the Goonies. Like, there's so many great Karate Kid. There's so many great 80s films that just you remember. It's in some ways it's like putting on. I think there are like records to periods of our lives, like where you put in. At least for me, I put on songs or put on CDs. No one really has CDs anymore, but put on, stream the songs, and it takes you back to that time. For me, it was these different times of my life where I was like, that was the soundtrack for that year. And I think film in that way reminds me of the 80s. Like, watching Back to the Future for the first time, Goonies. I remember Indiana Jones is like my most favorite. Like, I remember watching, all of them. Didn't really like the Temple of Doom, but the other two especially were.
And all this to say is, like, we use a lot of 80s stuff to market our show all the time, just because we needed a theme, we needed some music, so we put like synthwave on our shows a lot. We have like a Stranger Things vibe. we use like old artwork from the 80s to like market it. Like a lot, we rehashed just about every brand and vibe and style from that. So that's how we used to kind of give the show some marketing. Luca told me to make one of those 80s baseball hats with like the bubble letter.
Yeah.
And
did we send you one of those yet, Derek?
We need to get him a fresh one.
We got to get you a fresh original hat.
We need to get him the original.
We need to get you one. It's all bubbled out. It's like the Chicago Bulls hat from like the late 80s, early 90s. It's all puffed out.
It took me like 2 days just to track down that font.
It's kind of like it's the Clark Griswold Chicago Bears hat from Christmas Vacation, right? Except it's bubbled. And anyway, so yeah, man, 80s. If you're a kid of the 80s, or
that's why you asked us.
If you're not and you appreciate the 80s, it was just a different. It was a. It's all part of our childhood.
Yeah, it was a magical season, right? I mean, that's I think part of what makes the Blurryverse unique is your marketing of the 80s, whether it's Back to the Future. I mean, that movie was one of my absolute favorites. You mentioned the Goonies, Indiana Jones, all those, the music. And then there was the toys. I'm going to show you guys two things from my collection here. Let me know if you can. This one might be a little bit more rare for guys who played with action figures in the 80s, but do you remember these?
Dude, I do remember that.
Is that GoBots?
What is that?
This is actually a Rock Lord.
Dude, I remember those things, man. Turn into rocks. I haven't thought about that, and I mean, we're old, but like
it was crazy. I literally played with this back in the 80s. My mom found this in the garage several months ago and gave it to me.
There you go.
I hadn't seen this thing for how long, and it it teleported me back into the 80s. It was so insane.